Welcome to the Salt Lake City Mayoral Debate, presented by the Salt Lake Tribune and Fox 13.
Hello and welcome to the Salt Lake City Mayoral Debate here at the Downtown Public Library. I'm Ben Winslow with Fox 13 News.
And I'm Jennifer Napier-Pearce, editor of the Salt Lake Tribune.
Today we're going to hear the candidates for Salt Lake City Mayor, Luz Escamilla and Erin Mendenhall, debating some of the biggest issues affecting our city.
Now, this debate format is a little bit different. These two candidates have been out on the campaign trail. We want to try something new. Ben and I are going to introduce an issue to the candidates, and then they will engage with each other. So each topic that we have is going to be limited to 4 minutes of this kind of back and forth. We've got timers for each of the candidates that they know about. Ben and I will be able to interject to follow-up questions on the topic if needed, and then we're going to move on to the next issue. So we'll run through as many questions as we can, including some that came in on Twitter, and we'll have a 1-minute closing statement. A coin toss determined that Erin Mendenhall will answer the first question.
All right, so let's get to it. Every mayor comes in with a list of initiatives and ideas and programs. I think about previous administrations having an Office of Sustainability, an Office of Economic Development, but I want to try the inverse of this. If elected, what would you get rid of?
That is a very good question. The first thing I would get rid of is returning impact fees to developers, because the city administration hasn't figured out a way to have growth pay for growth. And to date, we've returned over $3.2 million back to developers who willingly paid to compensate the city for the increase in public services, police and fire, parks, and the needs of a city that grow with every new resident that we have. We have to stop giving those back. And so I would update our impact fee facility plan so that we can have growth pay for growth in Salt Lake City from day one.
Yes, thank you. I think in my case, I will definitely look into restructuring the way we do processing within the city. And that actually will include not necessarily closing any departments, but restructuring the way the departments are and bring administrative services back to the city.
This is the moment where you can also ask each other questions or challenge each other's decision-making if you choose.
We're just getting used to this new format here, Ben.
It's pretty new.
Give us a question.
Fair enough. We also don't have to take the entire 4 minutes, just
That's
so you
right.
all know. And that's actually kind of a good thing. Let's go to the next question, Jen.
So you've both been involved in community affairs for years in various capacities. What does Salt Lake City need that it doesn't currently have? Luz Escamilla, you first.
In terms of community affairs?
Just what is
overall.
the city overall?
Okay, thank you. So I will say that the first thing Salt Lake City needs to do is have a mission that really focuses on sustainability and a vision of inclusiveness for all Salt Lake City residents. That requires a very intentional process of including all residents from everyone living on the east side, west side, north and south of Salt Lake City. How do we get there? We get there by taking City Hall to neighborhoods, including them in the conversation, thinking outside the box of the times that the meetings have to take place. So we're making sure everyone that may have 2 jobs or 3 jobs in many instances just to make it here in Salt Lake City can participate. Individuals that may be limited English proficient also get to participate. So a Salt Lake City that includes all will be City Hall in neighborhoods and making sure that communities get engaged. The other part is in sustainability. We need to think 25 years from now and really plan everything with the lens of sustainability, from health and human services pieces to infrastructure, air quality, homelessness, and affordable housing.
Erin Mendenhall.
Salt Lake City needs a mayor who has the vision to actually get more out of the growth and the investment that is happening here, happening to us in many ways as a city. I actually don't doubt the city's sustainability goals or drive or initiative. There's some people from our sustainability department in the audience tonight, and they have been really front runners, even nationally, on its sustainability initiatives. The trick is, how do we get them the funding that they need so that they can do more of what is a critical and even the most important issue for Salt Lakers, which is air quality. And part of that mission for your next mayor is going to be to bring more momentum, investment, and partnership to the table so that we can actually implement the things that we already know we need. We know we need a public transportation system that serves all of our residents across the city easier and cheaper than our cars do. We know we need to bring back Things like our neighborhood cleanup program. We may not agree on that, but I hear from across the city people wanting to be able to engage in city services and sustainability in that way. We know that we need to get better with our recycling. We can't keep shipping our environmental waste across the ocean anymore. They aren't taking it anymore. So how are we going to engage with technology, investment, partnerships that get us more as a city? The tech ecosystem is another thing that we should have in Salt Lake City. We don't have enough of it today because it's the highest paying jobs and the fastest growing industry who shares so many of the values around sustainability, diversity, inclusion,
And we're about
access to
halfway.
opportunities.
Any questions amongst each other? Any follow-ups here? I do have one if you don't have a question for each other. I want to know about, especially when you talk about public transit, who's going to pay for it? And some of your predecessors in the primary suggested the idea of free fares. Y'all, any positions on that? How do you feel about the idea of a free fare for every city resident? Go ahead, Erin, Mendenhall.
I'm going to answer your question about how do we pay for that. Salt Lake City residents already said we're willing to pay more to get circulator buses on the ground. I did that as the chair of the council last year, and that's why starting just in August, we have our 3 first circulator buses in the city. How do we get the rest of the transit master plan that we know we need, we know where it needs to go? We can't pay for it fast enough. Our economy depends on it, our air quality depends upon it, and really affordability and livability in the city depend on creating other options for people to get around. That very growth and investment, the economy that is putting 6 high-rises up in our downtown in the next few years, that's who needs to help us pay for it. I've already started the conversations with the partners who it would take to dramatically shift the way we move people in Salt Lake City. That's why I created the proposal that every ticket to a Salt Lake City event, sporting goods, religious, theater, is a ticket on transit. The University of Utah has already done it. We should do it too.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think part of how we frame this conversation is understanding the inequities between East and West when it comes to mass transit and how we get people to have accessible, convenient ways to access public transportation. So right now we need to close that gap. Again, you need an intentional plan to do that. I think the plan that the city administration passed in collaboration with other stakeholders is a good start. We need to do more. And part of how you do more is have buy-in from the state. We need funding from the state, very specific to addressing this issue in Capital City, where obviously the problems of air quality are more complicated than other places. And I think I'm prepared to get into those conversations and get more funding specifically to this from the state legislature.
How much funding are you talking about?
Should be starting at least at $5 to $10 million.
Okay, let's go to a question from Twitter. This is Bill Tibbetts of Crossroads Urban Center. He asks, according to reporting in this morning's Salt Lake Tribune, Salt Lake County's new homeless shelters are already out of beds for women, and up to 30 women are being placed in motels and overflow beds. How will you, as the next mayor, ensure that people are not turned away from the shelter, particularly in January and February when it's so cold outside? Erin Mendenhall, you go first.
Yeah, women are why we are having this conversation in the first place. It was services to women in many ways that compelled the state, the county, and the city to look at the road home and the services there and who are the most vulnerable people on our streets and not accessing those services. I am proud to have championed the women's only homeless resource center that's open now in 700 South. And it breaks my heart that the snow hasn't even flown and women are already being denied a bed at our new homeless resource center. We can't wait for people to be freezing on our streets in the first blizzard of the winter to wonder, what are we going to do with people? This is also not a Salt Lake City problem on our own. We've never had the partnerships that we have today from the state and the county, and that's where the conversation needs to be about emergency winter shelter. When the state talks about the closure of the road home and achieving certain benchmarks in order for that closure to happen, hearing the news that we've heard in the last 24 hours tells me that we may not be able to meet those benchmarks. If we are not going to be able to provide adequate emergency winter shelter, then maybe the road home shouldn't be closing this fall.
Who's Escamilla?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm calling the No One Night initiative. We really need to make sure that no child or pregnant woman, potentially, and a parent with a child stays in a resource center or shelter at all. I mean, we should be moving our housing stock to just answer those needs immediately. That should be the first thing, and I'm committed to doing that. So we're going to have some emergency sheltering crisis happening, and it's not only related to women and children, it's going to be a lot of people. I think there are opportunities with what we have with Catholic Community Services that I've been in conversations. So it's not necessarily the road home, but across the street to retrofit some of the buildings where now those resources have moved to the resource centers, which is the right place to have them. But I will say we first have to make sure no child, no mom with a kid or a dad with a kid, any child should be, or a pregnant woman should be staying in any of these facilities. First, make sure that they move into affordable housing right away. We should just put that stock in place, put all of our resources, or prevent them to be homeless. I know that the administration is barely getting to that point. There is already one person in staff. We need to do more. That should be our number one priority.
So do you agree that the main shelter should stay open?
Not the road home, no. It should be, that emergency sheltering crisis should happen somewhere else, not at the road home. I think that brings a lot of other situations that were addressed on the audit that the state did, and there's a lot of problems. Let's get it somewhere else. It shouldn't be there.
Go ahead.
I don't think that the road home should close for political reasons. The road home should close when we have the appropriate system to deal with the human beings who are on our streets. We've already had frozen winters or frozen nights before winter already in the last few weeks. So my question is, there's no doubt that we shouldn't have women and children and pregnant women, vulnerable people on the streets. How will you pay for it, or where will you put them? Because creating the facilities is one thing, but we're talking about in days or even weeks. Where will you put them?
Yeah, correct. So the units are already in place. We need to start just moving them into those affordable housing units and permanent housing units. What we can have is on the road home, I think we need an emergency shelter no matter what. We're going to need it. Whoever is the mayor is going to have to deal with that. Because we already are at capacity. We haven't even opened the new resource centers completely. So to me, it's clear, but it's not the road home. That brings a lot of other issues. People have trauma because of that location where a lot of things were happening in there. I think we retrofit CCS across the street. But in terms of the housing, yeah, it should be investing with the state and making sure we have units that are ready. And some of them are available. We should not have a child stay even in the resource center. And I guess some will end up in there, but if we have that intention to move them out of that location as soon as possible, that should be our priority.
Please.
Do I get to, okay, thank you. My understanding, I've been working with Bill Tibbetts and Crossroads Urban Center for 6 years on addressing affordable housing and homelessness. And my understanding is that those units are not available. And that's why people are being turned away from shelter. That's why we're having to access motel vouchers. That's why we're talking about an affordable housing crisis. So the units aren't available. And I'm not talking about perpetually keeping the road home open, but this is a humanitarian crisis on our hands with a winter pending and a state-county system that hasn't figured out where to put enough people. The units aren't there yet.
And the reality is, it is a city, county, and state issue. The road home was not addressing the needs, clearly created a chaos, and for the last years of this administration, we've been in terrible chaos, worse than it was 5-6 years ago. So clearly whatever we're doing was not working. So let's shift the whole thinking. You're right, there's not all the units available. Let's work with the county for other units outside of Salt Lake City as well. Let's find them. Let's find a way where we can pay for them, and help from the state is there. We're already spending hundreds of millions of dollars in this. It's not like the money is not, we're not pouring the money there. Let's make sure we're smart on the way and sustainable in the way we're spending that money.
Right. I've got a similarly situated question here. Despite the new homeless shelters opening, there are still a number of people who are on the streets right outside this very building who are going to be camping overnight. If elected, are you going to allow overnight camping to continue? Let's start with Luz Escamilla.
Thank you. So first, I think we first have to provide an alternative for individuals. Right now, there was not that alternative because it wasn't safe for them at the road home. I mean, we need to recognize the trauma and how scared individuals experiencing homelessness were facing with the idea of going to the road home. That's why I've had conversations with many of them, because I represent Salt Lake City and West Valley, and that's where they are camping as well. So one, if we provide an alternative that makes sense, that's why I'm saying the road home is not the answer. It has to be somewhere else. create some trust, and some people will be resistant to some of that help, but we need to be there. We need to come with social workers, not only law enforcement. And a lot of that work has been shifting towards that, this comprehensive wraparound services, but we need to be doing more and making sure we have the mental health and substance abuse ready. It has to be ready to serve. That is a county issue. So that collaboration between the county, the city, then the state, Medicaid expansion, that's how we're gonna pay for this. And we have to make sure that those services are coming down for the resources and the payment of that. So to me, it is going and having and building trust relationships with them. Many of these individuals have been experiencing homelessness, chronic homelessness for years, decades. It's gonna take a lot of wraparound services and case management. We should not let them sleep like that. It's inhumane. But we also have to manage that trauma and the way they're gonna get to there. But we should have the facilities ready with the wraparound services ready.
Erin, Mendenhall.
There's no doubt that we need services. There's no doubt that this isn't just a city problem. This is a state, county, city, even a regional problem. And I think gratefully that the state is starting to recognize that this isn't Salt Lake City's issue. This is an issue, this is a part of humanity. This has been a reality for all of humanity over the years. We've had camping in Salt Lake City forever, probably. And certainly in my lifetime, we have never reached the crescendo of on-street camping that I think that we have in our city today. We still have a doubling population along the Wasatch Front, and we should continue the population of people experiencing homelessness to continue. So it's not enough to just say we need to, we're gonna work on the relationships. We gotta actually look at what kind of tools does the city have. I've brought money through the city council. We did $650,000 to the county to expand access to detox beds, and unfortunately the county had to give that money back to us because there weren't enough service providers, there weren't enough beds to connect people with. This is a bigger conversation than just bringing the money or having the relationship. So what can Salt Lake City do? We can look at our encampment ordinance. We can look at the definition of what an encampment is and talk about what the presence on the streets looks like, and how do we compel people into services. If we are able to grow detox and addiction services and mental health treatment services, which the city has to champion at the legislature as much as we possibly can, as long as that's going the way that it is, we are going to have people in need who aren't interested in going to the homeless resource centers and who want to be somewhere on the streets.
But yes or no, would you get rid of camping? And I'm going to pose this to both of you.
Well, that's an Eighth Amendment question that you're talking about. It's not as simple as would you get rid of camping. And I think this gets into the detail of knowing what the city's levers are. How does city government work? And what levers can we pull? You can't force someone to continually move without moving them to a place that's even better than where they were. Right
so
now,
I'm going to take that as a no.
With homeless resource centers full, there's no option.
I think part of, my opponent talks about very specific pieces. She's absolutely right. I brought the in-between $1 million plus $350,000 ongoing programs for a very specific population. So even recognizing the diversity of the individuals experiencing homelessness is critical. Not everyone is in the category of mental health and substance abuse. Those are the ones we see on the streets. We can provide services. We just need to make sure we're moving ahead with the Medicaid expansion pieces and the services providers through the county and the state. But everybody else is housing first. And for some of our youth, it's a little bit of a different situation. So first is even recognizing the diversity. When I was talking about the in-between, we're talking about a very specific population, individuals that are chronically ill and that have a very situation of fragile medical stuff, and they need specific services.
Any questions you have for each other on this one? No?
All right, we'll move on. All right. State leaders, of course, are pushing a massive transit hub called the Inland Port on the city's west side, prompting questions and protests. This is a two-parter. Is the Inland Port inevitable? Let's go with that one first. And we will start with Erin Mendenhall.
I wish that this city had ever been given a vote of do you want a port or not, but that has unfortunately never been a reality for us. The question has always been, would you like us to do it for you from the state of Utah, or city, are you going to do the work yourselves? And the job of Salt Lake City Council and even Mayor Biskupski has been to keep the city in the driver's seat as much as possible on the development of the port. As long as that port land is in private hands, as it seems to be quite happily at this point, Salt Lake City does not have an opportunity that I have seen yet, and believe me, our mayor and council have looked for us to abort the port and make it stop. In the meantime, our litigation must continue. Of course, we've gone on and on about how I think we both support the litigation. We've never had 20% of our city's head on the chopping block before. But we can't put all of our eggs in one basket. And so the city needs to remain at the conversation, be working every angle we can to get the best possible outcome on this thing. And that's going to mean future legislation too, from session to session to session.
Who's this guy?
I do have a question, if that's okay.
Is the port inevitable?
No, a question for my opponent.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Thank you. So as, I guess my question is, when you and members of the council rezoned that northwest quadrant piece from agriculture to M1, what did you guys thought was going to happen? I mean, it obviously was going to increase the pricing of that area, the cost of the land. So what were you guys expecting coming from that, even before the legislature came with the inland port?
I think you're trying to pose that the city council was the impetus, or that our action to rezone was the reason that the inland port was coming, but it really shows a fundamental lack of understanding of how our city government works and how we've been working to protect ourselves against the state of Utah. The state told us, if you don't work with these property owners to rezone and make an inland port master plan with them, we will do it for you. And that's exactly what they did with all of the land south of I-80 that's now in the Inland Port Authority area.
So you don't believe rezoning was a problem at all? I mean, going back prior to inland port legislation, rezoning was not a problem?
The rezoning was either at the hands of the state of Utah or at the hands of Salt Lake City. And Salt Lake City leaders have to keep Salt Lake City in control of this land. I don't trust the state legislature to make any land use or tax decisions for Salt Lake City, and I don't think you do either.
But I mean, the rezoning did not help. The
Everybody hold your
rezoning didn't
applause.
help. You will still be in the same process. I mean, look at the $28 million, funding for the RDA. How is that different?
I don't think you understand the options that the city has had since 2016, when those private property owners said, we want to build an inland port, and the state said to Salt Lake City, either you get to work zoning this land, creating a master plan, and working with those property owners, because that's what cities are entitled to do, or we're going to do it for you. The rezone is a piece of a process that the city either had to do or let the state take over. It wasn't a question of whether or not the rezone was a good idea. The question is, do you want Salt Lake City to be in control of this as much as possible, or hand it over to the state legislature?
So rezoning was for an inland port when you guys were doing rezoning under the protection of the city. So you guys were already rezoning for an inland port, just not run by the state.
I'm
Am I correct?
surprised you don't know this already,
No,
because
I'm
it's
asking
part
you
of
so
the master
public
plan.
knows that.
It's
I
part
know,
of
I've
the
seen the master
master plan.
plan. I'm asking you so the public can hear this. Is this rezoning because the city was planning an inland port?
The city was working with private developers who are planning an inland port. And
Okay.
that's what the master plan,
That's my
that's
question.
been through all of the normal public processes, has always talked about. This is not news.
I do have a follow-up question to all of that. What will either of you do, if elected, if you lose that lawsuit? Let's start with Luz Escamilla.
Yeah, I mean, there is that possibility of losing the lawsuit. I think the revised lawsuit that the mayor brought and had two pieces to it, it's a stronger lawsuit than the first one she provided. And I think there is opportunities to make sure that we have that representation and protection for, especially the taxation component, and the fact that right now we will not have taxation. We will be taxation without representation under the scenario that we have. I think if the lawsuit doesn't work, we have to continue to work to make sure we get our land use authority back and make sure we get the tax increment. But the zoning already happened. I mean, obviously there was going to be an inland port, regardless of whether the state is there or not. So I think in that sense, that's what we can do, is make sure that we get that back if the lawsuit does not happen as we expect. And hopefully we do get a good result from the lawsuit.
Erin Mendenhall?
So that answer is saying that if the lawsuit isn't successful, then we need to try to get the same thing some other way. There isn't another way unless the legislature has a dramatic change of heart and wants to give us back our taxing and our land use authority, which of course we should continue to entertain and try to cultivate that reality somehow into the future with the legislature. The reality is that if this litigation is not successful, Salt Lake City needs to work like hell to protect our authority for the rest of our city. And the way that we do that is by working with the other taxing entities, the school district, who is not represented on that Inland Port Authority. Our schools are losing 40% of the future tax revenue from that area. That is unjust. And they haven't stood by us the way that I think that they can in the future to say, this is not right. This is not right for the city. This is not right for our kids. Beyond the school district, I'm a member of the board of the League of Cities and Towns. Utah League of Cities and Towns is 247, every single city and town in the state. They recognize that they could be next in the sights of the state that sees something they want, they see an economic opportunity, and they swoop in and do the same thing they've done to Salt Lake City. I have joined that board to help build and cultivate our relationships so that as we go forward, Salt Lake City doesn't have to stand alone again. This isn't just a Salt Lake City issue. What the legislature did to Salt Lake City is an abomination to every city and town in this state.
Any questions for each other?
No, I think there is a possibility of changing. It will require legislative action. There's a lot of conversations because they know it's not feasible and this is not working as they plan. So yeah, we're gonna have to get back as much as we can, and it will require multiple legislation for a long period of time.
So what gives you confidence that that could be a possibility, that legislation could happen in the future at some point?
Yeah, no, it's process, and clearly, when we have these conversations with some of my colleagues, they're like, Salt Lake City was already putting an inland port there. Don't come here and say that there was no vision for inland port and we were the only ones that wanted it. They clearly did something wrong, and I think they're seeing the aftermath, and people are very angry, and I applaud those individuals that are standing up for this, especially in my district, because we are directly impacted. But I think there is an opportunity to get back some of those pieces, and it will be in incremental steps, but we're hoping that the lawsuit is strong enough and that the courts can help us navigate the whole process and give some closure to this.
Anything you want to add?
Yes, actually.
Go for it.
We're in a
You've got about
vein
30
here.
seconds.
Oh, it's not enough.
Not enough?
I'll whittle it down. You have said, in even tonight in another debates, that the state should come to help us solve problems, homelessness, affordable housing, transportation issues, even inland port with future legislation. How have your relationships over 11 years of being a senator actually helped us when we were left with nothing? Nothing. How did your relationships help Salt Lake City?
Thank you, Councilwoman. I have to tell you, the fight is not easy, and you obviously enjoyed a supermajority and a very progressive, all ultra-liberal council, so you don't know what it feels to be in the superminority. And we stand strong. We got monitoring on air quality and water quality. That's how I've helped. So I believe there is ways of doing this. I passed 50 bills. It hasn't been by mistake or by, because she was nice to us. It's because I know how to work with them, and I build relationships of trust. And I just was talking to some of them. We already are talking what's going to happen because they know they did something that was not okay and that it really hurt a lot of people, especially the process, the behind the doors. But I have to say, the city hasn't been helpful in that process. So, I mean, if we're going to start pointing fingers, there's been a lot of issues of having a coalition being built, and I hope we can do that together. Whether you're the mayor or I'm the mayor, because I'll still be in the Senate, you'll still be in the council, this is important. We have to collaborate and bring us together to be a strong capital city that we can be by working with the state. I'm convinced that's the way to do it, and it will require being nice to people and working with them and understanding the process and respecting that we may agree to disagree, and to me those are very critical pieces in the conversation, and that has been lacking from Salt Lake City.
Right.
Please hold your applause.
Please hold your applause.
All right, let's move on to another topic here, and we are halfway through. Salt Lake City has yet to consider an ordinance to regulate e-scooters that have proliferated the city. Well, what would you like to see it say? And secondly, do you consider them a nuisance? Let's start with Erin Mendenhall.
Well, I think one of you, at least at this table, lives downtown and walks on the sidewalks downtown. And I have heard from hundreds of Salt Lake City downtown residents who do feel that they're a nuisance. I've walked with my kids on the downtown streets after an event or going somewhere and been whizzed by scooters that make me fear for my little 3-year-old. We are considering an ordinance. It's not yet in discussion, but we have the ability to learn from cities around the country who are a few steps ahead of us in dealing with scooters. I've had meetings with scooter companies who have brought some pretty great ideas from cities like Portland. You remember those red light cameras that used to catch us going through a red light and send you a ticket? Those kind of cameras positioned on the sidewalks, identification tags on the scooter's posts, so that if a scooter's come down the sidewalk, it immediately identifies it, sends a fine to the scooter company gets to collect the fine from their own customers. We've got to increase enforcement. We also have to make them fit better into our city. We have not had a new transportation master plan in over 2 decades. Transportation is more than buses, and it is more than cars. It's green bikes, it's scooters, it's shared mobility. It's things we haven't even seen yet. So can you imagine a city that actually plans for this kind of growth, that perhaps we even paint a parking space on each block, and that's where you park the scooters. You can see it, it's visible, and it's not on the sidewalk, interrupting ADA and people walking. We've got to make sure our sidewalks are safe. It's a fundamental requirement for a downtown city.
We're almost halfway through this topic. Luz Escamilla.
I will add, I agree with most of the things my opponent just explained. I think part of it is also making sure those companies that own the scooters are keeping maintenance on them. There's a lot of malfunction. It's happening, creating a lot of crashes, but making sure that we're not interrupting viability and walkable communities, it's critical. So I agree with most of the things that she said.
What would you like, though, just to see in this ordinance, though? Is there a specific thing? Because how can you enforce the ban on sidewalks?
Yeah.
You can say no sidewalks, but they're still on the sidewalks. So I'm going to pose this. Erin, let's go ahead with you first.
Oh, we can enforce the ban, and money is a great way to enforce things. So when you can identify scooters better than they are identified today, and you can use technology to generate those fines, share them with the person who violated it, it definitely has an impact. But beyond that, Salt Lake City should consider how many scooter companies we want to have. We may have too many on the ground today. We need to consider equity in the distribution of them. And it's not necessarily going to make these venture capital business cases to put scooters in all of our neighborhoods of our city. But if you want to do business with Salt Lake City, we're going to talk about equity. And we're going to talk about where you put those scooters. So that should be a component of the ordinance.
Luz Escamilla?
I think technology to track them where they are. There's already ways to doing that. Also education. This is obviously a new tool. This is not everyone is familiar with scooters. A lot of younger people are getting into the emergency room. We've seen an significant increase of the emergency room visits due to scooters and crashes due to scooters. So I think it's an issue of education. The city can lead on those education pieces in collaboration with those scooter companies. But more importantly, it's going to be enforcement, keeping the maintenance, and having them also be part of the solution through technology that's already available.
Have you ridden a scooter, Luz Escamilla?
Once. It was not, I was scared. I didn't like it. With high heels, it's not fun.
Erin.
I have. There's even a podcast of it on ULCT's stream.
Okay. Let's transition to air quality. Air quality, of course, the top issue for city residents. There are plenty of ideas out there about getting folks out of their cars to clean the air, but I'm curious about what ideas you have that do not involve cars to clean up the air. And Luz Escamilla, you go first.
Thank you. I would say, one, our plan is on our website, luzformayor.com. For us, buildings is a place where we can start finding also ways of reducing, to increase the quality of our air and making sure that we're reducing emissions. So the way we do that is by collaborating. I think we need ways of partnership to bring more resources so families, individuals can actually help and retrofit some of their appliances to make sure that they're more compliant with way to do green and reduce those emissions. At the same time, Salt Lake City and its own buildings, we need to start checking and having more transparent information of how much we're emitting from our own buildings to Salt Lake City. Those are some of the pieces. Obviously, the inland port is another one where we have to be careful. So as this may be moving forward, we've talked about that possibility. What are going to be the pieces that we are putting in place to make sure that we can reduce that air quality, starting by the collection of data and how we interpret that information and use it for data-driven policy decisions.
Erin.
I love air quality. It's my favorite subject. Of course, you know that. And it's the reason I got into politics. It's still the thing that compels me to stay in public service. And I'm grateful that the conversation has gained so much momentum in Salt Lake City, but in Utah, that it is the #1 issue of most of the residents, at least along the Wasatch Front, and even farther into rural Utah. Air quality is a major issue, appropriately so. It is a life, health, and safety issue for us. And so how do we get people out of the cars? I'm going to actually answer your question here. We have to dramatically shift the way we move people through Salt Lake City. Most of us, if we did a raise of hands, I bet most people here drove here in their cars tonight. And I would bet the majority of those people drove here by themselves. We haven't made it more convenient and more affordable yet. In order to make that dramatic shift, I've proposed that every ticket in Salt Lake City is a transit pass. When you think about the partners it would take, it is not that many. I've already started these conversations, and people are intrigued, to say the least. The University of Utah has already done it. So no matter where you live, if you're coming down here for a concert, for a religious event, you're going to see Book of Mormon at the Eccles, or you're going to General Conference, it doesn't matter. You're going to think, this ticket is going to get me on transit. I don't have to pay for parking. And the benefit is that once you take transit for fun, you're more likely to take it for work or for your next visit. And that dramatic investment in expanding our public transit system through partnerships is the momentum we need to change the way we move through our city, making it more convenient and more affordable. And then there's all of the other parts of mobility about the city subsidizing shared mobility, Lyft and Uber to help you get from your home or your work to the transit stop, buses, bikes, supporting green bike expansion throughout the city. There's a lot of ways we need to do it. It can't just be one approach, but that dramatic shift to partnerships, we have to take advantage of that.
Any questions?
Yeah, I'll just add, and I'm sorry, I thought your question was not related to transportation.
Not
vehicles.
related to transportation.
Okay, because I was confused there. Thank you.
I was confused too.
Just to clarify. So, I mean, but if we talk about transportation, I also say accessibility, and so it's beyond affordability. For many individuals, it's really difficult to get and to use some of this, public transit modes. So we have to make it more accessible and more convenient. We have to cover people when it's cold, when it's snowing. They're going to be waiting 10, 15 minutes. Our current system does not provide that. We have to have, make sure those hubs where you're waiting are accessible and are convenient, so you can actually use. So even if it's a free pass, why would I use that if it is not convenient for me? So we have to address the disparities of everywhere in the city, the distance, and how the gaps need to close before we get them. And part of it is, requires education, but also the ability to have people be able to get point A to B in a time that's reasonable.
And we're out of time on that topic, unless you have a question for the opponent. No? All right, let's move on to affordability. Jen, you've got that question.
School enrollments have declined since 2015, and young families appear to be fleeing to the suburbs. It's expensive to live here. What would you do to attract families to live in Salt Lake City? And Erin Mendenhall, you go first.
Great. I'm going to talk about attracting families in two ways. We're going to need to talk about housing, and we need to talk about the costs of after-school childcare and summer programming. Salt Lake City has a housing plan. It is a spectrum of housing needs. It's not one housing type. It's not just apartments, obviously. It's everything from dorm style up to single family. And as housing has become more and more expensive, the natural market forces have led to adding more units per building than fewer, which means they're smaller. More studios, more one bedrooms, a few 2 bedrooms, very few 3 and 4 bedrooms. It makes it very hard to afford to live in Salt Lake City if you need more than 2 bedrooms, or to even find the housing. Our housing plan and the ongoing revenue that I helped find is on the council last year goes into our housing trust fund, and it helps to create opportunities for families to get into housing and then to help them stay there when they become housing compromised. We know that half of the renters in Salt Lake City are paying more than they can afford for housing. The second part about access to opportunities, we have Youth City programming. Youth City is a subsidized, high-quality after-school and summer program. Huge wait list. It's only at 5 locations around the city. None of them are schools. The schools are experiencing a dramatic decrease in their student populations. They literally have spaces built for kids where our Youth City programming makes a really obvious opportunity to fit together. I've already started these conversations as a councilwoman. As a mayor, I can lead this conversation with our school district to see how we can support families by expanding our amazing Youth City opportunity into the schools who need the support just to be able to stay open.
Thank you. So we want to become an education destination. We have great higher education institutions. We're lacking in our K-12 because of resources. As we're losing children and families because of affordability or because of the quality of education, we're losing our WPU. So what we need to do is make sure we build a strong coalition to make sure that we go and advocate for more funding. And I'm hoping to do that with my opponent, because we're going to need all the groups coming together. The elected school board, which is an independent group, our city council, our mayor, and our state legislators that represent Salt Lake City, because we need to make sure we make the case to the state legislature that there is a specific need for Salt Lake City, because it's very difficult to attract businesses when our education is lacking. So I think there is a great business case to make that if they invest, the return investment is on an economic development perspective. It's a lot of the lingo that resonates with my colleagues in the state legislature, and I'm ready to have those conversations. After school programs, I've been running legislation. We've been putting funding on that. We need to draw down those funds, and we do that through a matching program. These are my bills in the last couple of years. We need high quality after school programs, especially on the west side where they're lacking, and that's actually where most of our kids are. We have a majority school district now, so we need to be acknowledging that there's all these other gaps and pieces of social determinants of health that are impacting the quality of life of our residents, and it's critical that we address them in a comprehensive manner through high quality evidence-based after school programs.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So is your answer about more money or more programs?
I think there's a combination. So one, you need to draw down as much money as possible.
From
the state. And Salt Lake City has not drawn some of those monies from the state for after school programs. It's very specific.
Because they're competitive with every other city in the
Correct.
state.
And we have a great point to make about why Salt Lake City as a capital city needs to be very strong. And having high quality after school programs is a really good reason to have businesses come and visit Salt Lake City as a potential location to relocate or put their business here. So absolutely, they're competitive, but we can win them. We have already high quality evidence-based programs in Salt Lake City. Run through the city, you have the Boys and Girls Club, which is a nonprofit component, and some of them are nonprofits. Salty Cricket is another one, and then you have the schools. They have their own programs that we've seen on the news that they're closing those programs. It's a combination. Let's bring them all together. Let's strengthen those programs, but they have to be also equitable east to west and north and south.
I want to mention that Salt Lake City's been trying and competing for funds at the state level for a very long time. This isn't for a lack of want. And even the Boys and Girls Club, but our schools for sure are having a hard time getting enough funding just to operate. So if we're competing for these after-school funds, it would not be truthful to say that we are competing in the most aggressive way, or rather in the most competitive way we can, because we are competing against programs that are already doing this, are doing it well across the state, and that are underfunded today. So I think that Salt Lake City's been trying for a very long time to get these very same funds, and we've had 12 years of former state legislators as our mayors. We have not been successful yet. I'm not willing to wait another 4 years or 8 years for another former state legislature to tell me they're going to be able to get something from the state we haven't had in 12 years.
All right, let's move on to the next topic here. It is virtually impossible to ignore Salt Lake City's new construction. It's everywhere. But much of the building boom appears to be downtown east. So if elected, what would you do to boost West Side property values? And let's start with Luz Escamilla.
Yeah, part of it is having a city that intentionally cares about the West Side, and it hasn't happened. And it's been under current leadership, under previous leadership, but it's a reality. I've had people that come and visit say, oh, I thought Salt Lake City ended on the I-15, and there was a different city west of I-15. So we need to acknowledge that there's those disparities, and how we do that. Well, one is what type of businesses we want there. There's been 11 years of trying to invest on the North Temple corridor, and people are frustrated. Those business communities are in my district, and they're upset that there's nothing happening there. So we need to shift on how we bring some of those opportunities to those areas. But part of it is also building communities in those areas. And you do it one home at a time. I love what Neighbor Works is doing to create neighborhoods, one home at a time, one street at a time. And that will be, again, that will include some affordable housing, but also other type of housing that needs to be mixed in the conversation, because not everyone will fit on affordable housing. We need to also take care of our middle class. There is a working class that is leaving the city because of affordability as well. So to me, it's a combination of things, but we have to be intentional and address the disparities on the west side from everything that we're doing, from beautification to aesthetics. That has never been addressed, and it's been on the current leadership.
Erin Mendenhall?
We need to talk about what we can actually do as a city, because the systemic and ingrained segregation, truly, that has happened in Salt Lake City to our west side is complex, it is unjust, and we could sit up here and take the whole rest of the night to talk about how important it is that we address it. That doesn't get us any closer to actually addressing it. You need a mayor who understands the tools that a city has to actually provide access, and I'm talking about transit access, which is about putting circulator bus routes like ribs on the spine of tracks to finally connect our west side and our east side in a real way. That's what I did last year on the council. Connecting economic access. That's why we built the 9-line redevelopment project area. It's about to come online, and it's for 9th South. Check it out. It's an incredible amount of reinvestment to bring the economic stimulus that that neighborhood needs. It's why we did the West Side Master Plan. It's why 9th West looks different today, has pedestrian bulb outs, has street lighting, has more amenities. It's not even close to being done yet. We have to know the tools. How do we stop concentrating affordable housing on the west side of our city primarily? I know about this. That's why I built a $4.5 million fund for the city to allocate toward areas of high opportunity, because we can't continue concentrating affordable housing on one side of our city. You have to be able to unpack what is systemic, what is historic, and what is biased, but not intentionally perpetuated by a single person in City Hall today. I think everyone in City Hall today wants to do better for the west side. It's harder to know how. Look at our records. Look at the actual results that I've gotten for the west side of Salt Lake City. Look at the 4 bridges, literally bridges, that we have built to connect the west side just in the last few years. We have to do more. It is complex. We have to be able to unpack it. It's not enough to just say we need to do something different.
Thank you. And I happen to disagree with my opponent on this. Nothing has happened, and the people in the west side don't feel like anything has been done by the city. So it's a totally different story. So I encourage you to go and talk to those individuals, because they don't feel like they've been heard or represented by Salt Lake City Corporation and their legislators, and in this case, their council members. So it's a matter of opinions, because I can also tell you what I've done as a state senator for my district, the west side, and it's very specific. But to say oh, no one else can do it, I disagree. I think if you surround yourself by people that know, and again, we've done work on even educating families about the importance of air quality, making sure that they participate because they know that this is important to them. That they may be facing other issues, but air quality is so critical. We've been there in the grassroots level, talking to those communities. The tools, I get it. I'm not dumb. But it's important that we make sure there's intention, there's commitment, you put your money where your mouth is. You guys are a little bit late, and it's not fair for those communities. I live there, so I can tell you, we don't feel like we've been represented well by Salt Lake City. We haven't done it since I've been there 22 years. So, I'm glad that there's a commitment on your part. I'm looking forward to working with you to making sure those inequalities are closed as soon as possible, because we can't wait anymore.
Yeah.
Tell me the tools. Tell me what you'll do.
The tools is an investment. You bring good investment.
We have brought that. We have brought the investment, and it's really just beginning. With the 9-line master plan, it's not even finished. The West Side master plan was just completed. Transit just hit the streets 6 weeks ago.
Why just now?
I just got to the council about 6 years ago, and we've created a West Side master plan, a 9-line redevelopment plan. We've implemented a transit master plan in the first phase. We intentionally built that master plan. Actually, we intentionally implemented the circulator buses into the west side despite the mayor's recommendations where they said they wouldn't get enough bang for our buck. We said it's about equity and access. I'm asking you, though, to tell me the tools.
One tool, the Fair Park. We're still waiting on whether a farmer's market opens there for the last 2 years. I'm in those meetings with those community members in the community councils. You guys are still waiting for a plan, and it was a study. And I'm like, is it going to take 2 years to do a study on whether we make a decision like that? That's an opportunity, Councilwoman.
Actually, you sit on the board of the Fair Park, and it's a
No, I don't
state-run
sit
entity.
on the board of the Fair Park.
You're right, it's the rodeo at the Fair Park.
Yeah.
But the state-run entity, you are a state legislator. This
No,
is
but
not a
this is
city-owned
the
property.
the farmer's market.
That's right, and I helped to get the funding for a study to look at if with a city could put a farmer's market
It's been
out
a year
there.
and a half. Oh, no, we saved the Fair Park. Absolutely. Thank goodness we did, because it's a jewel to the state, and they were really ready to make it parking lots.
Do you feel
And
that the
it
Fair
does-
Park is a catalytic investment that is uplifting the west side?
Absolutely. Right now, it's better than
365
we
days a
were.
year.
It's way better than it was 5 years ago, absolutely. But it wasn't because of the help of the city. I mean, it's really about capital improvement. We've been putting the money in capital improvement. Now we have a stadium that is generating more things, but we've been talking about collaborating with the city and making sure that there is ways that we can bring more things, but the city also has to be part of that solution, right? I mean, the Fair Park is not an isolated piece. So when you think about that development there, when you talk about the business owners in there that want to leave, what you've been saying is it's something that's been master planned. Where's the master plan? How come it hasn't been executed? So for those areas, what's happening in there? And why are those businesses feeling that just the homeless issue and the public safety
1 minute left
piece?
on this segment.
I want to mention another fundamental lack of understanding that's a little bit disconcerting, that you don't actually understand what the city has done and what the city's tools are in your own district, right there on North Temple, that you don't understand what the North Temple project area is, what it can be, and what if we had the right kind of state partnerships, perhaps we could create the catalytic project that just in the last meeting, the redevelopment agency was desperately looking for what kind of investment can we make with the money that we're collecting to make a catalytic project here. We have not heard from you. We have not heard from the state. And it's a little disconcerting that you don't actually understand the tools that if you win as mayor would be yours as the executive director of the redevelopment agency.
I'm ready to take action for a change, Councilwoman, in the West Side, ready.
I would love to hear how you're actually going to do it.
Thank you. Let's move to the next question. A question from Twitter. Philip Jones asks, Utah is a heavily Mormon state, but Salt Lake City is uniquely less so. How will you reconcile the overwhelmingly LDS state leadership and influence of the LDS Church with a city that is less than half LDS? And Luce, it is your turn to go first.
I think like any other religion, the LDS Church is part of our community, and I'm a member of that faith, and has been an interesting piece of media for the last couple of weeks. And I think they are a big player in the city. I recognize beyond just being an interfaith conversation, they own a lot of property, and they're in many, doing a lot of also other work related to nonprofit ability to serve communities. I think we have to recognize that there is a power exercise through that process, and I've never been influenced by the church in my 11 years. You can look at my record on issues that they've had taking positions. I voted against all of those positions, so I don't see why that would change. So to me, it's an issue of staying strong to the core values of Salt Lake City, listening to constituents, which is what I've been done for the last 11 years, and I will continue to do it as a mayor.
I don't think this is anything new or recent. I know that the numbers have been in decline over a long, long period of time, but I think that it's not about reconciling necessarily. It's about being able to be productive in the context of this state, not sticking our head in the sand, not getting angry and walking away as our mayor has done too many times, not burning bridges, because whether it's tomorrow or a week from now or a month from now, we're going to have to come back together to address another issue. That's the kind of a relationship that I have worked to build over a dozen years of being an air quality advocate. When I started working on air quality, it was not a popular issue. It was a fringe environmentalist issue. And I had to find a way to make a common ground with every representative or senator that I would sit down with. I had to find a way to thread that needle of the conversation to get somewhere productive. That experience and that skill set has worked for me so many times over as I came into city government, and we have to figure out how to have a productive conversation with a legislature that's 9 out of 10 members of the same church. That's probably not going to change. Salt Lake City has to have a mayor who knows how to lead with a temperament that can get along with the Republicans in the legislature, but stand strong for Salt Lake City. We are the political pendulum swing from the rest of the state. It is what draws so many of us to want to live here. And I think it's actually the tension.
Bruce has 1 minute left.
It's the tension between the cultures there that creates such an amazing, productive, creative, artistic, and engaged community
You're both out
here.
of time.
All right, we're going to move to closing statements. You have both exhausted all of your time in this debate, but this has been a fascinating conversation. You each have 1 minute for your closing statements. Let's start with Erin Mendenhall.
Yeah, thank you, Ben, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen to our conversation tonight. I am sitting in this room with you for the same reason, because I think our commitment to making sure that Salt Lake City is a better place for all of the residents who live there, who live here. Salt Lake City needs a mayor who has the vision to see that our challenges and our opportunities are not mutually exclusive. We've talked a lot tonight about some big challenges facing us, but in reality, there are some really big opportunities. If we have the kind of a mayor with a vision to hold that together and to work to get more out of what is happening to our city, the growth, the investment, the population, we've got to get more out of it and stop sitting back and making it difficult for things to happen in this city. We've had 12 years of former state legislators as our mayors.
Time.
I'm ready.
Luz Escamilla.
Yeah, thank you. I love this city, and I love the opportunities that come here in Salt Lake City, opportunities that welcome me with open arms as an immigrant to this country, and it's been great. I want the same quality of life and opportunities for my children. I think my opponent and I agree on the issues. We may disagree on how to make solutions doable for the issues. I also think there's other pieces that are different. And some of them is our own life experiences that help us frame the way we address issues, our experience in the different sectors that can partially determine whether we're going to succeed or not. And of course, our record. And I encourage you to go and look to my website, some of those pieces, and compare. I think compare and contrast is important. If you like what you've had for the last 6 years, vote status quo. I mean, if you're happy, that's why I'm running for office, because I'm not happy. And I don't see this city moving forward towards a sustainable approach 25 years from now so my kids can live here and enjoy the quality of life. If you want change, then vote Luz Escamilla. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for our candidates. Ballots are hitting your mailbox this week. Please remember to vote. Please thank our candidates, Luz Escamilla and Erin Mendenhall, one more time.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.